Hello, everybody, and welcome to Play Some Video Games Reviewcast of Virginia. It is I, your host, Kyle. What? No, it's not Kyle. It's Kevin. But Kyle's here with me, if you couldn't tell by the laughter. It's late at night. Kyle and I are going to talk about some wacky games tonight. We're going to start off with Virginia. So it is my first appearance on a Reviewcast, so it's going to get a little bit crazy here, folks. So, before we kick it off, Kyle, you did play Virginia, correct?
I did indeed.
Okay, and before we get into what Virginia is, what attracted you to the game in the first place that made you decide, hey, I want to go ahead and play this game?
Well, part of it was you, because you had played it and you had mentioned how it was a interesting, indie game that was out there now, and then it just has kind of been making the rounds. It's kind of become this indie darling that some people really, really love. Some people don't. But it definitely is getting a lot of attention, I think, just for how the game is, the style of the game and how everything is put together. And I like small experiences. I think we kind of have those conversations of, I'm someone who enjoys being able to sit down and finish a game in a sitting or two. I'm like many people, less and less time to play games. So I like those that feel manageable and that I can finish. And I like indie games. I like those smaller titles and supporting small teams trying to do different things. And this kind of seemed like it would fit the bill.
Yeah, definitely. And it's odd for me because me historically not being the indie gamer, I'm now getting more into the indie games. And I normally like these grandiose games that go on for hours and hours and hours, and these two games we're going to talk about between this podcast and the next one we're going to do are shorter experiences that I beat in a manner of like 3 or 4 sittings, and my sittings are normally like an hour tops, so they're fairly short experiences, but with Virginia, so the reason, what I do is when I look for a game that I want to review before reaching out to publishers, I try to learn as little about the game as possible. So I probably take a different approach than most reviewers do. They'll look, read a premise, read maybe something about the gameplay, and say, "Hey, I think I want to try this out." For me, I looked at a couple screenshots and said, "This looks pretty interesting. Let me try and reach out," and we did. And I got a copy for review, and I know you paid for your copy, so a little bit different there. But I knew nothing going in, so I just started the game up and experienced it from there. So I had no background, so I came fresh off. I wasn't inspired or driven to try it because of something else I read. I literally saw some screenshots and said, let's do it, go for it, and the developer was nice enough to accommodate us here so we could review it. So just to warn anybody listening, there will be spoilers in here. So if you want to play Virginia and you do not want anything spoiled, if we could actually spoil anything in this, turn it off now, because we are not going to hide anything, because it's really hard to review this type of game without going into more detail. But if you want a semi-spoiler-free review, you can see my review on the website. I didn't give away too much detail other than the overview of the story, which is available for anybody to see if you're just going to the purchase page on the game. So, but in this podcast, the gloves are off. We're going for full details here. So, for those of you who are not familiar with Virginia and want to get to know it, Virginia is a first-person mystery thriller adventure game that takes place in a fictionalized Virginia in 1992. Players take on the role of Ann Tarver, a graduate FBI special agent who is assigned to partner Special Agent Maria Halperin. Much of the game involves the player as Tarver in the company of Halperin, traveling between locations, interacting with other characters, and with objects in the environments. Scenes transition using real-time cinematic editing with cuts and dissolves occurring as dictated by the story to propel events forward. So it's set in the last days of the summer of 1992, and you're investigating the disappearance of Lucas Fairfax, a young boy from the rural town of Kingdom, Virginia. The game is experienced through the eyes of Anne, as we mentioned. As a rookie detective, you're paired with your partner, whom your superiors instruct you to keep a watchful eye on, kind of as an internal affairs investigation. As the story progresses, your partner's trust in you will be tested to the breaking point, all while your investigation takes on an increasingly sinister and supernatural turn as the list of suspects grows ever larger and stranger. So that's kind of the story, if you will. So I think we'll just start right off the bat, Kyle, without getting to the story. Let's kind of go over the controls. So for me, right off the bat, the game just kind of throws you in. It doesn't start off with like an intro story or anything like that. It just you're in control of the character. For me, the controls, I mean, obviously the game is very, very simple. I think it's just the X button to interact with certain things, and you just move around using the control stick. for me, the initial thing that caught me, and maybe it did for you as well, was the control for the camera seemed to be really loose at first. Like you'd hit to the left and it would go way to the left. It didn't seem to be as tight as you'd see with maybe like some of the first person shooters or anything else that you might experience right now. But after playing for, maybe a half hour, if that, maybe about 20 minutes, I got used to it. But for me, I mean, the controls are very simple. Anybody can play this game. But the camera just did seem a little loose to me. How about you, Kyle?
I would agree. I think that was one of the points that it's awesome that you got used to it. I never really felt like I did. I kind of always felt like I was struggling a little bit, especially when there's rarely something super small you have to interact with, and they do a nice job of making it very clear of like, hey, you can pick this thing up, just get your reticule like in the middle of this kind of big circle. But I was definitely struggling at times. I was overshooting things very regularly when I was trying to turn and like look down to pick something up, and it was a little, I don't know, floaty for lack of a better term. Part of me wonders if that was on purpose. Was it, because you're kind of looking back? I don't know. I was trying to figure out like what was the choice to make the controls this way, right? Because they clearly chose to make it that way. So I was like trying to figure out what exactly the angle was, because the game is, we're not going to get to the end yet, but the game's kind of trippy. There are definitely some parts in it that are kind of weird. There's a lot of flashbacks. There's a lot of dreams. So I didn't know if this was an attempt to kind of bring you into that almost dream-like state as you're going through it, or if it was just like, hey, this is what we feel good with and we're going to go with it. But I would agree, the controls did throw me off a bit. Definitely not so much I couldn't get through the game. And for how simple they were, though, it did seem kind of, hey, this seems a little more complicated than it should be.
Right. It is for note that the game is available on PS4, Xbox One, Windows, and Mac OS. So that almost makes me wonder, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about the floaty reticule. It almost feels like, I haven't played PC games in a long time, but it almost felt more like if you were controlling the camera with a mouse, like as to how responsive it would be, like maybe it would work better on a mouse than it would be on a controller, perhaps.
And that could be because I really suck at games, and this is one of the reasons I can't play driving games, is that I'm one of those people who, like, my analog sticks are in the center or all the way to the side. I'm not really an in-between kind of person.
Sure.
Yep. So, and that's, like, I know that's why I'm bad at some games, but it very, very well could be that I just suck. Like, that's very possible.
So yeah, like we said, it is very simple. The camera is a little floaty, but it's very easy for anybody to pick up and play. The other thing I kind of want to get into before we get into the story, although this kind of goes hand in hand with the story a little bit, is the soundtrack for this game. So the soundtrack is unique in the aspect that this game, before we get into the story, has no dialogue whatsoever. So there are no words. There's a few newspaper clippings and computer screens you can read, but like 2 throughout the whole game, maybe 3. So it's not something that can help drive the story. It's more on what you observe and how you experience what's going on around you. But the soundtrack in this was actually performed by the City of Prague Philharmonic Orchestra, and it plays like a movie score throughout the entire game, right from the opening scene when you press start to the very end of the game. There's just music that fits the tone and the pacing of the game. So when you're in, you're out in the countryside, or you're out in the mountains, it's subtle and it's just kind of in the background. But when something important happens, it ramps up to kind of climax the story as it does without having any dialogue. It kind of acts as the dialogue for this game, which I thought was it was an amazing touch. I'm not a big fan of like movie scores or anything like that, so I'm not really picky about stuff like that. But with the absence of any voice acting or any words whatsoever, this seemed to fill that need, at least for me, and I thought it was a unique twist and added to the story of the game in that aspect there. What do you think, Kyle?
I think the score in this game is fantastic. I'm someone who, if you read my reviews, I always talk about score, music, voiceover if it's there, because I think for me, as someone who really enjoys music, it's something I am always drawn to, and how does the music add to the game, especially in a game like this where there is no talking, there is no voice work, there is no, very, very rarely is there text on screen, and if there is, it's a document, it's not a text box popping up, telling you stuff. So I thought it was fantastic. I think one of the things, right when I started playing this game, my wife very rarely watches me play games, but she happened to be sitting on the couch while I was booting this up, and it started, and a couple minutes in, she just turned and looked at me and is like, you know what, if nothing else, this game has a really good soundtrack. And I was like,
right.
It does. And I think they did a great job. I think, if I was going to describe it in a word, I would say haunting. I think that,
Yeah.
it's just a really fantastic score. I don't know if it's this game. I'm thinking of Bound, actually. I was going to say, if if the soundtrack for this game is available, I probably would pick it up for sure. I thought it was just spectacular.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And you brought up a good point, too, when you said as your wife was watching you play through the game. We, that play some video games, often get the question, for recommendations for games that couples can play or that, somebody can play around their wife, whatever, and that they might be interested in. I think this game is one of those things, because if not for anything, as we get into the story, it raises some eyebrows, and it'll get your attention one way or another, whether you like it or not. So it's definitely a recommendation, I would say, for people to play together or kind of experience together. I told my wife about the game afterwards, and she was kind of like, maybe I'll try that. So I'm eventually going to try and get her to play it and see what her thoughts are on, because it's short and it's weird. Cause we're going to get into, let's get to the story now, so we can say it's a gripping story in the fact that it's not a story, and that's what's weird. But so as we said, you take on the role of the special agent there. The game starts right off at your graduation ceremony, I guess, when you're given your badge and everything like that, and you're thrown right into your first case right off the bat. Game just throws you in. You take control of the character. You're walking through some hallways leading to the stage to where you're going to cross the stage and receive your badge from the head of the FBI, we guess, at that point. One of the unique things in this game, too, and we touched upon it in the overview, was the camera. Not the controls, but how the game's actually cut. Much like the score is very cinematographic, the camera cuts also seem to be like a movie, like a montage sequence. So, for example, you can see some of the gameplay we've streamed on our YouTube channel as well, but you'll be walking down a corridor heading towards like an office at the end of the hallway, and you make it about halfway down that hallway, and instantly it cuts to a stairwell, and then you're going down the stairs, and then it cuts to the stage. It's very jarring at first. I mean, because once again, you have no dialogue, you don't really know what's going on. This just kind of happened right at the beginning, and this all happens within the first 5 minutes of the game, and it threw me off right off the bat, and I was kind of like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know if I'm digging this. Eventually, as most of this game grows on you, it grew on me after the fact, but right off the bat, it kind of pulled me out a little bit, saying, all right, what's going on? I'm getting frustrated here. It's like, am I doing something wrong? Is this a, an error? Is this a glitch or something like that? But for me, it threw me off at first, but then I kind of realized where they were going with it, and it was very much like an interactive movie more than anything. Did it mess with you at all, Kyle, from the start?
It threw me off a little bit just because, like you had mentioned, it's not something you see in video games. You don't see jump cuts happen in video games pretty much ever. So it did throw me off a little bit, but then once I got into it, I was like, all right, this is awesome. I see where this is going. And I think there's this it's overly simplistic, but I think it makes sense and helps me at least understand like the difference between television and movies, and the fact that in theory you should be able to watch a movie with zero dialogue and still understand what's going on because it's a visual medium. So
sure.
And I feel like this game very much feels that way. Like there obviously is no dialogue, but just trying to watch it is telling you this story. Whereas television, in theory, you should just be able to listen to a television show, not see the show, what's happening on the screen and all, and still be able to follow the story. So, and I think that this game does a really good job of trying to really blur that line between, okay, how much of this is a game and how much of this is a kind of an interactive movie or an interactive experience we're just giving you. And I think those jump cuts really help immerse you more into that and help it feel even more like it's, this experience or this movie that, you're a part of, but you're in some ways just kind of there for the ride. You're definitely in charge of that ride, but it's kind of taking you along on this very planned journey that it has for you.
Exactly. The creators knew right from the start where they were going to take you and how they were going to get there. You can't go off the beaten path per se. You can't go in the wrong direction in this game. It's always going to push you towards where you need to go. You can explore some environments to some extent, or you can just go right for the goal to some extent. But overall, you'll never get lost or end up spending, an extra 2-3 hours with this game. It's just impossible. It's always kind of pushing you towards advancing the story one way or another. Now, another thing to go along with the jump cuts, if you will, as you put it, are the dream sequences. So the game is riddled with, I want to think back, I want to say it was at least 4 or 5 in the about 2 hours the game took, where there was these dream sequences that pulled a bunch of symbolism and things you saw throughout the game. But a lot of the times, at least for me, I didn't realize it was a dream sequence until something very weird happened.
Yep.
So, like the buffalo in your bedroom, that was a random one that shows up, but it was this is part of the game I was torn on. So when I completed the whole game, my first reaction, I messaged everyone in the staff, was like, okay, I don't know what I just did. I don't know what this game was. I don't even know if it actually ended because of the dream sequences. And it left a semi-bad taste in my mouth, and I had to sleep on it. And the next day I felt better about it. So I was like, okay, this is the direction they wanted to go. And you have to take this game more like a director's cut of a movie, where you may not agree with the movie, you may not love it, but you need to respect it because the director, or the developer in this case, had a set message they wanted to deliver. It was clear in the fact that they did it the way they wanted to. Whether or not we understood it, we'll get to that later, but they knew exactly what they wanted to do, and they portrayed it in a way I think was fair. So, I mean, the dream sequences were cool to some extent, but I felt, for me, as the story advanced, and we'll get back to actual what happens in the story, it got more and more convoluted and actually confused me as to what was going on by the time the end of the game happened. I don't know. How about you, Kyle?
Well, I will say the moment I became interested in playing this game is when you did message us all and be like, I don't know what I just experienced. And that's when I said, okay, I'm playing this game and we are going to see what happens. So at the beginning, I was super focused. I was hyper focused in on, like, I have to pay attention. And I was kind of even talking out loud to myself of like, okay, so this just happened, and this, just to kind of make sure I was like following along. And so after, a half hour, I was like, well, this isn't that complicated. And then the first dream sequence happened, and I wasn't sure that it was a dream sequence. And I was kind of like, what is going on? I'm kind of starting to get confused. And then I was like, oh, maybe it was a dream. And then by the end, I was just like, oh man, here we go. I think this is real. I don't know if this part's real. And then I definitely got lost. And you're right. When it comes to the end, which I'm sure we'll talk about, I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I have some ideas, which I think is part of the fun. And I think that's part of what makes it interesting and which makes it resonate is, there are those movies, and I don't want to necessarily spoil anything, but there are those movies where something happens at the end, or like the end of The Sopranos, where you're like, well, what actually happened, because it's just off screen or it cuts right before. And I feel like this kind of fits in that of like, well, what really was reality, what really was the ending? Is there a quote unquote right answer? I don't know, maybe there is, maybe there isn't.
Yeah, it's odd. So to get back to the story, so you partner up with your partner that your director has clearly given you her confidential file, and you get some back history to him, and maybe you can explain a little more, Kyle, if you caught a little more than I did, to your partner's backstory, if you will. With this is where I'm confused. So it might have something to do with the graphics and the fact that it was like very polygonal, and you didn't always get a clear view as to what you were looking at all the times. Plus, it depends on where you were looking at any given point. I'm not sure if this was supposed to be like her husband or her mother or her father that your partner seems to have some sort of history with, that you find out later on the game actually passed away. But that person also didn't have a very decorated history with the FBI. It shows that they may have blurred the lines a little bit to get jobs done, so they were afraid that your current partner was possibly doing the same types of things. But your partner obviously doesn't know that you're kind of keeping an eye on her as you go through the investigation, so your character's hiding the file in your briefcase a couple times, and eventually we'll get to that point that something happens with that. But the two of you venture out to look into the mystery of the disappearance of Lucas Fairfax. So you arrive at their home, you see the mother and the father. Now, see, this is where I'm getting confused now with the dream sequence or what really happened. Were the mother and father fighting when you first showed up, or was that in the dream sequence?
Oh, man, I think that is in the dream sequence.
Okay, that's what I thought as well. So you get there, and I'm pretty sure that the father's a priest. We know that much because he's dressed with the collar and everything like that, or so he's a reverend or a priest or whatever. And he's consoling the wife at that point. There's a couple police officers in there, and you show up with your partner. And this is where it gets a little tough because they don't really tell you what happens. They just kind of direct you to the son's room, and you're kind of investigating the son's room and, what happened to him, where did he go, and this and that. Eventually you find, is it a hidden room in the closet?
Yeah, in Lucas's closet, yep.
In Lucas's closet. So you're investigating his room, and you discover there's like a back room, a dark room in the back of his closet that has some photos, and you eventually find a picture of a cave in a field nearby, and apparently you had your aha moment, and you and your partner head out to that cave. This is where it starts to get weird. So at least for me. So throughout the game, it's also worth noting you find some flowers throughout the game that you can interact with and take, and they show up in your apartment during different sequences between the dream sequences and your actual sequences. But you find the cave and you encounter some people, I guess, that were outside the cave at the point. So you're questioning them. It seems like there's a boy and a girl. The boy grabs the locket from your partner's neck and throws it over the fence. I caught that much.
Yep.
And that has the photo of your partner's
mother, I believe.
Okay, that's what I thought too when I walking down to it. The picture of the partner's mother, and then she just gets mad and they cuff the kid and they take him away. But then you venture into the cave that was in the photograph, and it's clear that the kids in the town had some sort of hangout there. There was like a beat up old chair there. It looked like there was a record player or something in the corner. So it was definitely a hangout for the local kids. And you discover in the back wall. So I think this is actually the first dream sequence I think happens at this point. When you're investigating the wall and you find the red bird.
Right. I think, well, dream sequence, hallucination, whatever. Yeah.
Whatever.
Yep.
Okay, so you find, first you find the stamps.
Yes.
I believe. So you rip off a stamp and you give it to your partner and they put it in a red envelope, which we'll get to later in the game. But my take on it at that point, I figured that was an evidence envelope. And that was just going to be mailed off to the lab to find out what those stamps were, if you will. That had the picture of the birds.
Mm-hmm.
But then in the back of the cave, you find some boards and you kind of rip them off and you find, looks like a cardinal.
Yep.
And then the cardinal, does it fly off? Yes, because it flies off at that point and it drops a feather.
Yes.
Which is kind of in all the title imagery that you see as the red feather. And then, then it kicks into the first dream sequence with the bird dying and all this kind of weird stuff. You wake up in your apartment, but to not get too confusing, because it does get a little odd, it kind of kicks into the dream sequences when you go back and you see it feels like almost you're starting your day over again. So you go back to the parents' house, but this time there's the police guys are sitting around the coffee table and there's a waitress serving them coffee and donuts. Look, the husband and wife are arguing about the missing son, and then the father at one point's like boarding up his room.
Yep.
So yeah, there's just a lot of weird symbolism, and then you eventually wake up and snap out of it and actually go on your next day. So it gets a little bit hard to follow whether these are, as you said, hallucinations, or it's the symbolism, or it's dream sequences, whatever the case is. But the day kind of almost always restarts at some point. And the game does follow like a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday thing, but you almost have the same day twice because of either a dream sequence or whatever the case is. So yeah, I don't know if it's because I'm not smart enough or whatever, but I didn't catch a lot of what the symbolism actually meant with the cardinal and the red feather and the flowers. I know at one point your partner gets you the stuffed buffalo out of the machine, and that's probably why the buffalo shows up in your dream, but I don't know what that's supposed to mean. But as time goes on, your partner starts to catch on that you are investigating her, essentially, and she clearly gets visibly upset with you and kind of just throws the case out the window. At this point, your character starts to feel a little bit bad about the situation and where the case is going, and because you had gotten close to your partner and you feel for her and what happened to her, but yet she's upset because she thinks the whole time you were spying on her. So there is a point where the two reconcile, because you go back and you find her locket with her mother's picture in it, and you kind of see things from her perspective as to what happened with her mother, and you spend some time in her apartment, so you see the setup where the mother's hospital type bed was there, so clearly she was taking care of her mother towards the end of her life. And it just kind of gets a little weird, and it's a little bit hard to follow actually to where the case is. It becomes less about the case and more about the relationship with your partner. As time goes, she looks at you different. You can see the definition in her eyes and eyebrows that she just kind of questions you as it goes along, and then eventually comes to hate you. And you have some reconciliation there at that point. Why don't you take it over for a little bit, Kyle, and kind of give your impression of what the story happened before we hit the ending point so let's not go to the point where she gives her back the locket and they move forward.
Oh boy.
Give your impressions of what you think happened prior to that.
Okay, so you have a far better memory than I do about what happened each day. Because I was trying to think of it in much more in kind of broad strokes as I was playing through it, basically.
Yeah.
I think you're definitely right. I think that obviously your character is, doing their first job and kind of has this dual role of getting close to Maria, because that's kind of who she's been assigned to get close to, but also try to figure out exactly what it is that happened to Lucas. I think there's definitely some quote-unquote small town rounding of the wagons going on, because I think you feel that something fishy is going on here, and that his parents or parent, maybe just the father, knows more about the situation than they're letting on, but that there seems to be some sort of circling of the wagons, and that the local police and other people aren't really helping out with that as much maybe as they should be. There's definitely some, you are right that as things transition, you definitely get to the point where it's less and less about the story of finding Lucas and more about your kind of struggle with, okay, what is my role here in this job? Is it to find this kid, or is it to kind of narc on my partner? Like, what am I really trying to do here? So it does kind of become unclear, because most days that I woke up, I was like, all right, what am I going to do today? Am I going to go look for this kid, or am I going to try to see if I get more dirt on my partner? So
yeah.
And I think that, there comes a point where I think you clearly make a decision to a degree, at least. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's exactly what you're looking for, but like I said, you're clearly remembering this much more day to day than I was, and I was much more of a big strokes. What are these themes and what's kind of going on as we progress?
Right. So, and as you were talking, I was able to kind of collect my thoughts a little bit, because it was hard to kind of free form explain this as we go along. So, to go back to the case of Lucas, so there's the dream sequences and what actually happens, and we talked about the parents and that relationship, but at one point you do get back into the parents' house, and you find some evidence in the father's office that it looks like he's cheating on his wife with somebody.
Yep.
So we had that sequence happen, but here's the thing. It's like, that didn't seem to be really relevant, because number one, you had no idea who the other person was. At least I didn't ever catch who the other person was. And it didn't seem to have anything to do with the disappearance of his son.
Well, and see, this is where I think maybe, and I could be wrong, I think maybe that it does have something to do with the disappearance of the son, in the sense of, I think they're trying to allude that the father had something to do with it.
Okay.
So that...
I was thinking that too. The only thing that threw me off a little bit is what I was thinking, because the son takes the photographs and you find the photograph.
Right.
Is that maybe maybe the son ran away because of what he caught his father doing. But I mean, you're right. It could have been the father doing something sinister too, because he was always a little weird.
Right. And I think either one of those, when we look at the end, I think it kind of gives you the opportunity that either one of those or both of those might be accurate. But yeah. I think they're trying to say that, there were at least some role was had in his father, that his father was not the perfect upstanding person he appeared to be, and whether it was sinister and he killed him or did something to him or drove him away, that he had something to do with his son no longer being around.
Agreed. And the other part of the case, if you will, that you kind of investigate, besides what we talked about, was the I don't know what you call it, the telescope place. It's not a planetarium, but what would you call that? Observatory.
Yep.
So you go to the observatory, because I forget what leads you there, but that's following the case, and you explore it very briefly. I mean, it's like maybe 60 seconds the way the camera cuts on it. You can stall it a little bit after I read back to see the different options you had. You can stall it a little bit, but it's a very brief sequence there that you're investigating throughout there. You find some different clues and stuff like that, but then the father and the mother come in, and it looks like they were looking for the son at the observatory as well, and then it just does another wacky cut away, and you don't really go back to the observatory, other than at one point, which I believe this was during the dream sequence, that the mayor blocks it off, which that seemed a little random too, where it was like the mayor's campaign truck was blocking off the observatory so nobody can get in. That's what you said. It was kind of the small town mentality. They were circling the wagons to protect each other, but it just didn't seem to fit in once again, because it's like, well, why is the mayor getting involved? He had nothing to do with this either. Like, it seems like the story where it's like, okay, it's supposed to be about Lucas and it turned to more about you and your partner, it just kind of convoluted the story of what actually Lucas was doing. But so let's jump forward, because as we kind of talked about, it seemed to be, as you got farther into the case, it became less and less about Lucas and more about you and your partner. So you kind of have making amends with your partner at one point, where you give her back the necklace and you kind of just throw out the case on her, your investigation on her, and just kind of throw it out to the wind so the sheets go blowing off from the top of the observatory. You guys crack open a couple beers.
Because that's really a safe way to ensure nobody will find out this dirt. We'll just throw it into a field. It'll be great. Yeah.
Here's these classified documents. Let me just throw them into the breeze.
Right.
Yeah, so it's kind of odd. Actually, this is probably important. What leads up to that is a dream sequence you have that at first it wasn't clear that it was a dream sequence for me until it got towards the end, that it shows where the story would have gone if you turned in your partner. But the thing is that throughout the game, you didn't really see what your partner ever did wrong. So it's kind of weird. But it shows the story, the progression of your character, what would happen had she turned in your partner. And, you know, you're given another case and you get rid of another partner. And kind of everybody around you always ends up getting fired. And you keep getting moved up. It was like a 3-minute montage. It's probably the longest sequence of the game where you didn't have control. And it just showed the director giving you case after case after case. And you just continued to get people busted. And you just kept climbing that corporate ladder to the point that you took over as head of the FBI. And then it shows you shaking the hands of the new recruits. And you hand an internal investigations folder to somebody else. And, you know, they had to go off and do the job you had once done. That's kind of the aha moment for Anne, to say, like, hey, this isn't what I want to do. I want to make amends with my partner. That's when you track down the locket, you give it back to her, crack a couple beers, throw the secret documents out into the breeze, and say, screw it. At this point in the game, now correct me if I'm wrong here, Kyle, this is where I get a little fuzzy. The FBI discovers what you did in throwing away the documents and basically arrest you and Maria for what would appear to be the disappearance of Lucas, because they don't really have any other reason to locally arrest you in town, because you don't go to the FBI headquarters. You're in the town prison at that point.
Right.
So it looks almost like they think you're suspect of doing it. And this is where the wheels come off the wagon for this game. So you're in the cell, and you're in the cell next to your partner. And what was the sequence that happens first? The non so crazy sequence. I think you fess up to what your partner done, you get out, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one scene where it seems like you're locked up second. Your partner's picked up first. So I know that for a fact. You're thrown to the cell later. And the first sequence automatically just has you, basically looks like you're cooperating with the police, and you're taken out of the cell. And that turns out to be, I guess, the dream sequence, because then it goes back into the cell and you're back in there. And instead you're talking with your partner. Well, not talking because there's no words, but your partner hands you the red envelope back from earlier in the game. So I'm like, well, that seems weird, because if you had this evidence, and like I said earlier, I assumed that this evidence was mailed out to determine what it was. And I was like, well, maybe this is the key to show where Lucas is and we're not guilty and we'll get out of the prison. Nope. Instead, you open the envelope again, you pull out the little stamp, and it's basically, from what I can gather, like an LCD stamp, like an acid.
Yep, that was my take on it. Yep.
Okay. You pop it, and the game gets super weird. I believe a brick pops out of the wall in your cell.
Yep.
And it then opens up a secret pathway.
Yes.
You go through the pathway, and it leads back to the cave, correct?
Yes.
I think? Okay.
Yeah.
So then you continue to go through the cave, and this is all done in, like, super slow motion, so the movement is all slowed down throughout this part. It's just like a long walk. And you go deeper and deeper into the cave to the parts that you didn't get to before when you found the evidence with the red canary and red cardinal and everything like that. And you're just continue to walk through, and you eventually find, for lack of a better term, a cult.
Yeah.
And there's all these people standing around wearing these creepy masks, and they had the bull showed up again first.
Yep.
Right? It was the bull.
Yep.
And
the
they
bison,
were going
but yeah.
The bison, yep. Sorry. And they were getting ready to stab the bison, and you grab somebody's hand, you stop them from doing it.
Yep.
And then it turns into you're one of the people in the mask, and it's who was the person it turns into? Was it your partner?
Oh crap.
Or was it Lucas? Crap. All right. I guess it doesn't really matter.
Right.
The bison turns into a person, and you kill it. And it went completely off the rails. So clearly you're having, well, my take on the ending was you're having an acid trip, and you're imagining all this crazy stuff is going on, but all the cult figures pull off the mask, and it's the mayor, it's the head of the FBI, I believe. Actually, no, yeah, I don't think that the person you stabbed was your partner, because your partner, I think, is one of the people with the masks on. You have a mask on, and like the police chief had the mask on. So
and I think so.
It turned out like the whole town.
Father.
Yes, yeah, the priest, yeah, Lucas' father. So yeah, the whole town, basically any character you interacted with in the town and in the FBI were all part of this cult. So once again, it goes back to that circling the wagons thing, but it made it seem more like, okay, Lucas was a sacrifice at some crazy point, but you have nothing to base it on throughout the gameplay. And then the other thing it cuts to was now you see what happens to Lucas, supposedly. Lucas kind of runs down to the same field that you would experience earlier and appears to be abducted by a UFO.
Right.
Once again, makes absolutely no sense. So if you're still listening at this point, God bless you, because I don't know how me and Kyler are explaining this game. And
I'm going to be honest. I don't think we're doing a great job.
I don't think we are either, but too bad they're listening. But yeah, I mean, this is what we're saying, that this game got really weird. It seemed to make perfect sense where maybe you didn't get all the details as to what your partner had done or why she's under suspicion or what her mother had done fully. This is what the backstory to the mother you only got through a couple like microfiche in the FBI catalog that kind of had her suspect of doing stuff, but you never really understand what's going there. But it's a clear plot, like, okay, I need to investigate my partner, we need to find what happened to Lucas. And once you determine your relationship with your partner is more important than your FBI career, the game just makes no sense. It's like the developer team had a great storyline. It felt like a movie. It was a film noir, and then it just went to X-Files, Twin Peaks, kind of just way out there with no leadway into that. Like there's no suspicion at any point throughout this game that aliens were involved, a cult was involved, or anything like that whatsoever. So I don't know why it just got so unhinged at the end. But this is where I jumped in and I messaged guys, and it was Kyle said, I said, I don't know what I just experienced, and that's what got his interest peaked to play the game. The game ends there at that point, guys. So, you're on an acid trip, you're apparently in a cult, and Lucas got abducted by aliens. Roll credits. That's it. That's the game.
Well, but there's one important thing, though, that happens after that, is there's also that scene where you both drive out, you and your partner leave, like drive out of Kingdom, and you see
right.
and you see Lucas walking on the side of the road.
That's right.
So, yeah.
Yes, that's right. That's the final scene.
That is the final scene, yeah.
And you have no idea at this point, like, okay, well, if everything prior was an acid trip, which seems like it was, well, then how did you get out of the prison?
Right. So
that's what I don't get. So, yeah.
Okay.
Take it away.
I'm going to talk broad strokes here, because this is just the way that things made more sense to me. And like I said, this is just thoughts. I could be totally wrong about this stuff. There's one important thing that you have in the game is that for a lot of it, you're carrying a broken key.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Yeah,
I forgot about that.
So and you see this furnace often, and you find out that at some point your character, you're on your father's on his deathbed, and he gives you this key, and you go and you open this box, and I don't think you ever look in it, but you just take it to the furnace and burn what's ever in there. So it's kind of like,
it's something you want to know,
right? It's you're kind of having your father's secret go to their grave with them, and that nobody's really ever going to know. And I think there's some parallels there to your partner in that I think that her mother, if I recall, I think her mother was doing some internal investigation into the FBI that for some things that were, maybe not going the way they were supposed to. And as a result, she kind of got blackballed and got in trouble, and they were able to pin some things on her to, discredit her. And I think Maria is kind of taking up that fight. So I think you then kind of see some parallels to like, well, I let my father's secret disappear, so maybe I can let Maria's secret disappear, because I've done it for one other person. I can see the desire to do that there. I think with Lucas, I think there is some kind of correlation between. I could be wrong about this, but I feel like in his dark room, I feel like there is a picture. One of his pictures is of like a UFO or something like that he has in his dark room. And I think that because the cave that you go to is right next to an Air Force base. I think there's some, whether it be cult or these people trying to call the aliens, I think there's supposed to be some kind of X-Files thing going on here where the people in the town have some sort of connection, correlation, something with these aliens that, I don't know. Like I said, broad strokes, this could be totally wrong, but I feel like that's kind of how that all ties together. It might be two totally separate things. It might not be related, but to me, with those things being so close together, seeing the weird cult thing going on, I feel like there's some correlate that maybe they pray to them as some sort of deity. Like, I don't know, but I feel like there's some sort of something going on there. I think for a lot of it, I think the bird is kind of like, hey, this is truth. Like, go this way. You're getting close to figuring out what things are going on. Even though I never was able to kind of actually figure out what's going on. And I think it's really interesting, too, that throughout this game, like, you're a woman, your partner's a woman, everyone who is screwing you is a dude. Everyone who's getting in your way.
Yeah.
Whoa, sorry about that. Everyone who's getting in your way is a guy. The leader of the FBI, the town sheriff, the dad. All of those people are people who are standing in your way, preventing you from doing what you're supposed to do. And I think she has that moment of, okay, if I continue down this path and doing what we're doing, I'm going to end up being just like this guy, screwing over people, down the road. And I don't want to do that. So when it gets to the very end, what's the true quote unquote ending of her going through? I think in some ways, I feel like maybe them driving away is kind of the true end, that is them going, because I feel like, when she's in the cave, she has that moment where, you find out that she's wearing a mask as well, and she kind of takes it off and she lets the mask fall to the ground and like break. Yep. And I kind of feel like that's her being like, I'm done with this career, if you would.
Leaving the burden behind.
Yeah, I'm leaving that behind. I'm done with that. Kind of like every morning there's a couple scenes in the game where she's always putting on lipstick. Like, she's kind of like, taking that off, and she's like, okay, I'm moving on with my life. I'm going on to this other thing. So I feel like that's kind of going on with that. I don't know. Like I said, this could all be wrong, but those were kind of from a broad strokes, like what I kind of felt was going on. The only thing that makes me think that isn't true is at the end is that when we see Lucas walking away, he has his guitar thing on his back, but I think his guitar was still in his room.
It was.
So that's like the one thing that I don't know if I fully know if that's right, because plus, if you're missing and you're just walking away from town, you think somebody would be like, hey, there's the missing kid. So, right. But I don't know, from a broad strokes perspective, that's kind of some of the stuff that I thought maybe was happening in there, and kind of what the symbolism they were trying to do and trying to pick up on.
Yeah, maybe the acid trip was, it was the false ending, and then afterwards, what happened that you don't see is they realize, these two agents obviously had nothing to do with Lucas's disappearance, and they had to kind of let him go, and that's when they drive away and see Lucas, and they realize whatever happened to him gave him a reason to want to leave, and they at that point obviously want to leave as well, so maybe they just figured, hey, we're all free from whatever binds us to our, the FBI in that town, so now they're all free, and maybe that's it. And I was thinking, you brought up a good point about the lipstick too. The lipstick actually may have symbolized, if you will, the mask, only because at the beginning of the game every day she would apply it.
Right.
But by the last couple days, I think actually the day before the last end of the game, she goes to apply it, decides not to, and throws it away. And that's, I think, the same day you reconnect with your partner and just kind of say, I'm done with it. So that literally may be her mask, the lipstick. So, see, we're figuring out some stuff as we go along.
That's right.
Yeah, here's let's wrap this up now, guys. So I gave it a score of 82. Had I acted impulsively right after I played the game and said, I'm going to score it right now, it would have been a lot lower. When I slept on it, I felt much better about the game. And as we're talking about it now, like I said, I'm appreciating new things that popped up on it. So I gave an official score of 82% out of 100. Overall, I did enjoy the game. I was confused by the ending, which we're talking about, and I'm still figuring out now. And I tried to read online, and a lot of people don't really seem to have clear vision either, and the developers are just sitting back and probably laughing about it. But it tells, in my mind, a good story. As weird as it gets, it had me hooked the whole time. At no point was I like, I don't care anymore. That never happened once. So I have to give it a lot of credit for that. The score was amazing. The mechanics, like I said, it was a little wonky at first. I got used to them. I know you didn't, so it was a little bit weird. We're a little bit divided there, but I enjoyed it overall, so that's kind of why I scored it the way it was there. So now, Kyle, you have not reviewed it or scored it other than our conversation here. So if you were to score it and then kind of summarize why, what would that number be, and what would you have to say about it?
I'd probably give it like an 85. I think that games like this are the reason I play video games. I know a lot of people play them because they want to play the next Call of Duty and they want to play the next Madden and and that's fine, and I like those too. But stuff like this is when people are experimenting and trying to do things on the edge and trying to do things we haven't seen before. Like, this is the kind of stuff that I like to see, and I honestly kind of want to play this game again Because
Yeah, I do so.
because having gone through it once, it's kind of like rewatching a movie that's really complex. When you are like, okay, I think I know what some of the secrets are, but now how does this connect back? You know, this I feel like this is a cop out, but I say it in my reviews all the time. It's definitely not for everyone. There is going to be some people who will play this game and say, Kyle, you are stupid. Why would you ever give this game an 85? But I think it's very unique. It's very original. I think it's telling a story we don't see told very often. I think it is pushing games. It is increasing the sphere and increasing, what it means to be a game and broadening that. And I'm all for that. I like when things continue to push the edges and push the molds of what we consider it to be. So am I maybe giving it some extra points for that? Maybe. But hey, we just had a 45-minute conversation about a game that we've already played. For how long we've been talking, we could have played half the game again.
Yeah, exactly.
And we both kind of want to go through it again. So, and I think that says something. So yeah, I would give it an 85. I would recommend it. It's pretty affordable. I think it's $10. I actually
think it's on sale right now. If you have PS Plus, I think it's actually $8 if you have PS Plus right now.
Right. So I think it's easily worth that. Like I said, go in knowing that this might get weird and it might not be for you, but this is the kind of stuff that I love to see people doing, to do things differently, to tell stories in different ways. And I had a great time with it. Controls aside, I thought it was a great experience. I would definitely recommend it.
I agree. I recommend as well. As if you read my review, you'd see that. The one thing I want to note too is you're talking about, the game's not for everybody, but if you played a game like Gone Home, for example, where it's similar. It's the walking simulator type thing. Gone Home was very cut and dry. You went through the house, you experienced the story, you put together the story that way, and yes, it had words and dialogue and everything like that, but you didn't have to think about the hidden meaning. You didn't have to think about what actually happened. You were directly told in that game. In Virginia, it's totally different. It's still the same premise. Like, yes, it's a walking simulator, if you will. There's not a lot of gameplay mechanics. There's not really puzzles to solve or anything like that. It's just you go through and experience the story, but it gets you thinking, and it tells, in my opinion at least, a much better story than what Gone Home did. It was just more riveting and gripping more, which is amazing because when you think about it, once again, it pushed the envelope by having no dialogue, no words. So it had a better story by not having a story, ironically enough. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much my opinion. I liked it. It's worth, even if you had to pay full price and got the $10 version of it, it's, in my mind, it's worth at least playing through. It's entertainment for 2 hours. You can play it with your spouse. You can play it. I mean, it's safe to play around your kids too. There's nothing graphic or anything like that in it. There's no, nothing really to have to be concerned with. My kids were actually interested and wanted to play through it too, and I told them, man, you can play at some point once you decide you want to. But it's just different, and it's kind of entertaining for everybody. I would think you may not enjoy it, in air quotes, but it's certainly something to experience, and it definitely is a different take on the gameplay mechanics we're seeing currently.
Well, and I think a perfect example of it is that this game, I think we had talked about this briefly, not on this but previously, that it has gotten 3s from professional reviewers and it has gotten 9s from professional reviewers, and it's not like everyone gave it an 8 and there's this one outlier who gave it like a 3 or a 4. It is all over the board as far as what the scores this game is getting. So be aware, like it is going to tell you something probably, but you're probably not just going to be like about it when you're done.
Yeah, definitely not. It was divisive in the reviews, as you said, but at least from Kyle and I's take on it, we think it's both worth a play. So get out there and play Virginia. As we said, it is available on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, PC, and Mac OS. Go out there, play it. Let us know what you think. You can put it in the comments for the Virginia review. You can reach us out on Twitter at PSVG. Email us at podcast@playsomevideogames.com. Let us know your input and what you think about it, because Kyle and I like talking about it for the last almost an hour now at this point. So by all means, somebody else help us out and tell us what happened, because we still have some holes to fill in before we play it again. So as always, boys and girls, Kyle and I are going to go play Virginia again. You should play it for the first time and then never stop gaming.